Today we're going to talk about choosing the right shutter speed and the right moment for long exposure photography. Hey guys, this is Dylan Golby. Welcome back to Jeju Island. As a follow-up to last week's video, I want to take a look at choosing the right moment and shutter speed for this long exposure photography, because despite the fact that I used 30-second shutters last week, there are different shutter speeds that I could have used to different effect. The longer that you open the shutter for, the more that ocean is going to blur. The less you open it, the less it's going to blur. And so you can use this to creative effect. So today in this very short video, I'm going to run you through a few shots of this scene behind me here that I have just shot with the X-T3 and the 10 to 24mm f4. So let's have a look at those now.
Okay, so here we are back in the office, and I've got the images up on screen now, and I wanted to now show you sort of visually what I was talking about on the ocean side there, about the different shutter speeds and the different moments that you choose affecting the way that your final image comes out. So simply putting on an ND filter and using a long exposure isn't enough. You can get a lot more creative with that. So let's take a quick look first up about how different shutter speeds affect the way that the ocean renders. So in this first image, as you can see, we've got a lot of detail in the waves. We can see a little splash of the water coming up here. So we got a lot of the spray in there, and you get this sense that the ocean it's moving. It's quite violent. It's definitely got some strength to it. And so that can be achieved with a shorter shutter speed. Now, here that is 1/300th of a second, and that gives me all of the waves you see here are frozen, and you get to see the water flowing through the air. In the next example, I've gone down to about 1.5 seconds, and at this point you start to see that the further out waves are still visible. They don't really render enough detail to be smoothed out at this point, but the ones closer to us, you can start to see these tendrils of water coming in here as it blurs over the long exposure. And so you start to get, here you still have a little bit of that violence of the ocean, a little bit of that strength that it has, but you're starting to get a much smoother appearance to it, a much softer appearance to it. And in the third shutter speed that I used in this example was 10 seconds. And at this point you can see that the ocean is becoming a little bit ethereal. You no longer see those individual tendrils of water. The spray becomes more of a mist than anything else. And the waves further out are starting to blur. Now, if you were to move into something like 2, 4, 10-minute exposures at this point, you can really turn this into a really glassy sort of experience, rendering rather. But in this case, I didn't have enough ND strength to be able to do that, so we stopped at 10 seconds for this one. So let's now, now that we've seen sort of how the different shutter speeds can affect this, let's take a look at choosing a different moment within that. And so let's start, of course, with the shorter shutter speeds. So we're looking at a 200th to a 300th of a second, roughly. And let's just have a look at a few examples here. As you can see in this first one, there's a big wave crashing at the back there, but we have very little water in the foreground here that's got any interesting detail in it. In this one, it's moved just a little bit, but you're starting to see a wave coming in towards the bay a little bit here. It's a little more interesting in my opinion. The wave at the back, the very back of the set here, is starting to curl over, which looks really good. Again, here we're looking at a whole lot of whitewash. That doesn't really interest me all that much. You're also able to start seeing the pipe that's under the water here. There's a lot of debris washing up on these beaches. Here, you've got a little bit of a flatter appearance to the water, but you can see all of the splashes in the foreground here. Again, this is quite interesting to me. Here, I think this is the one that I showed you first, and I think that this is, out of that whole set, the most interesting looking one. And I really love just that tiny little splash up there in the about the middle on the left-hand side here. And then we have a couple more that I shot as the waves came in. So as you can see, you can really pick the moment that you want that best expresses what you're seeing here. Now, in another scene with maybe a larger rock and some larger waves, we could see this a little more clearly, where we might have a huge swell coming over a rock or something like that. But in this scene, as you can see, every frame that I take looks slightly different. So now I put on the ND filter, and we get a between 1.5 and 3 second exposures here, and you start to see that again, we have all these tendrils of water coming out. The waves are a little bit visible in the background here, but those crashing swells in the background have become sort of these lines of white, which honestly I think looks really interesting. And so I've shot a few here again, and again you can see this time around this swell has hit the side here, but no longer can you see the individual drops of water. This has just become sort of a splash coming up. And then you've got a few more. This one's a little calmer. So again, same shutter speed, but waves in slightly different positions, and you'll start to see that you get a different feeling with these as well. And in this one, what you see in the foreground here actually is water rushing back out. Now, once the waves are done coming in and they start to go back out, you can get some really interesting lines of water, because as the water recedes, it's revealing the ground below, and it sort of channels itself between rocks and things like that. So rather than being this huge violent swell that comes in, what you end up with is a sort of smoother, calmer water going back out. So if you're looking for this sort of effect, that's probably the easiest way to achieve it. Okay, and so a couple more here. Again, this one's got a lot of water going back out. Okay, and now we get a couple more of these, and now I'm starting to go, this is 3 seconds, so we're getting a little more smoothness to the water. I like the ghostly feel to all these waves out here. I think it would look really good in black and white. Haven't been processed yet. Another one at 3 seconds, okay, 2.5 seconds. Okay, and now we'll start getting into the 10-second exposures here. So from here we have this is 12 seconds actually, and so what you can see is this is a mix of waves crashing over the foreground and receding, so you get this very sort of, again, ethereal look to things. And you've noticed that the waves out the back here have all started to smooth out. Okay? So even with that though, if we choose the next one, as you can see we've got more of the whitewash in here, and more of the rocks in the foreground have been shown to us. Okay? And just one more to show you another example here. Here we have even more of the water going back out, and this section is quite calm. Actually, there's very few waves coming in at this point. So what you end up with is, I clicked the shutter when the waves got to here, and they basically came through and crashed onto all these rocks, causing this sort of misty appearance over here. And by the time the shutter was halfway done, the waves were receding again, so I get this nice show of rocks in the foreground here, but there was really nothing more out in the ocean, so you've got a smooth appearance out there as well. So, as I said, choosing the right moment is just as important as choosing the right shutter speed when you're trying to make frames like this. So to recap on that, the things that are really important when you're trying to make these long exposures of the ocean are the direction the water is traveling, just how violent the ocean is and what it's crashing over, and of course the shutter speed you choose. So if you play with all three of those variables, you can get a lot of variation from one scene, one composition, and be able to come home with some really interesting frames. And you might find something that perhaps works better than what you were initially intending to create. So just one final thing that I want to talk about is that these long shutter speeds can be really useful to isolate a certain subject. You know, if your subject is the violence of the ocean, then sure, you can photograph it at short shutter speeds and get that really, just the balls of water or the drops of water flying through the air and just really show how powerful the ocean is. But if you're trying to highlight another feature in the frame, it can actually be quite beneficial to blur the motion of the water so that your viewer then focuses on the subject that you're trying to show them. So, for example, in this scene here, I was photographing the waterfall. But as you can see, with all of the detail in this ocean, all of this whitewash coming through here, you really don't look at the waterfall first. You sort of, your eyes dart around the image, or at least mine do, dart around the image, and you're not finding a place to rest. Whereas if I then take this from its 50th of a second shutter speed here up to 27 seconds, you notice that the water in the foreground is no longer really your subject. It's just a support for this high contrast area over here where the waterfall is. The clouds have also started to blur at this point, so you can focus on just the highest point of contrast, which is the waterfall and what I wanted you to look at. Alright guys, so I hope that's been helpful. As I said, there's a lot of potential even within a single scene to be able to create a lot of different looks, so I suggest that when you go out to shoot these long exposures that you take a few different strengths of ND filter with you and just experiment with the length of your shutter and how that affects the image that you're making, and also experiment with the direction the water's moving and all of that to really try and give yourself as much variation as possible and really learn how all this works. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, comment below, ask any questions you might have. Also, below you've got links to the other work that I do. I write for CreativeLive and Fstoppers and Fujilove, so please check out my work there as well for a little bit more of this sort of content. And also please subscribe to my newsletter, which will give you the updates on all the different things that I do, and head over to my site and check out the rest of my work. So thanks again for watching, guys.